The internet started in the 1960s as a way for the US government researchers to share information, and computers in the 1960s were large and immobile, and in order to make use of information stored in any one computer, one had to either travel to the site of the computer or have magnetic computer tapes sent through the conventional post system. Another catalyst in the formation of the internet was the heating up of the Cold War. The Soviet Union's launch of the Sputnik satellite spurred the US Defense Department to consider ways information could be disseminated even after a nuclear attack. This eventually led to ARPANET, or as it's also known, Advanced Research Projects Agency Network, the network that ultimately evolved into what we now know as the Internet. ARPANET was a great success, but membership was limited to certain academic and research organizations who had contracts with the Defense Department, and in response to this, other networks were created to provide information sharing. January 1st, 1983 is considered the birth date of the internet. Prior to this, various computer networks did not have any standard way to communicate with each other. A new communications protocol was established, which was called the Transfer Control Protocol / Internetwork Protocol, or TCP/IP. This allowed different kinds of computers on different networks to, well, quote unquote, talk to each other. ARPANET and the Defense Data Network officially changed to the TCP/IP standard on January 1st, 1983. Hence the birth of the internet. A little while later, Tim Berners-Lee created HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol, along with his team somewhere between 1989 and 1991. All networks could now be controlled and connected by a universal language, which would be HTML and would come out in 1993. It provided the ability to put content online. Now, CSS as the styling language was invented quite a bit later, in 1996, when people started caring about aesthetics a little bit more. But a year prior to that, in 1995, JavaScript was invented by Brendan Eich, and it was developed for the browser called Netscape 2, and became the ECMAScript, or European Computer Manufacturers Association, ECMA, standard. After Netscape handed JavaScript over to ECMA, the Mozilla Foundation continued to develop JavaScript for the Firefox browser, and that's why JavaScript works ever so slightly differently on different browsers. Some of them use different JIT compilers and interpreters. For example, Chrome uses the V8 engine, while Mozilla uses the SpiderMonkey engine. But before all the modern luxurious browsers of today, we had Netscape until 1999. And it looked like this. Now, with the rise of Microsoft and their PCs going mainstream, the Internet Explorer was installed on each of their machines, and it soon overtook Netscape to become the #1 browser. It was developed in 1995, by the way. The next browser to come after Internet Explorer was Firefox around 2002, and while initially it turned out to be the better browser, so to speak, it didn't come close to dethroning IE and taking Microsoft's supremacy. Simply because people had to know about Mozilla and Netscapes and the other browsers, while Internet Explorer came with the computer pre-installed. Safari came around in 2004 as the default Mac browser, and afterwards Opera came out in 2008 with very little fanfare. The next year after that, Google Chrome was invented, and each of these browsers was consistently updated with each of the updates accommodating for the ECMA standard of JavaScript. However, Internet Explorer still held over like 50% of the browser market share, the absolute majority, until the end of 2010. And by the end of 2012, Google Chrome officially took Internet Explorer's #1 spot, and in 2015, it got to a point where they had the majority of the browser market share. In that year, Microsoft would launch Edge, its new browser. Edge kept getting better as time passed, but in the beginning it was very much hated. And after Microsoft revamped Bing and made it more powerful by integrating ChatGPT into it, people have slowly been starting to use and like Edge more and more. On June 15th, 2022, Microsoft officially discontinued support for Internet Explorer on certain versions of Windows 10, but these sorts of half measures generally become the default across the board, and Microsoft is now pushing Edge as far as we're concerned. Now, as browsers rose and fell, so too did the JavaScript go through its own little journey over the decades. Some of the code written back in 1995 would most likely be completely unrecognizable today, because modern browsers use modern engines, but back in 1995, Netscape used Mocha, and the syntax looked completely differently. Java was the most popular language back then, and the idea was that JavaScript would look like Java, but be a plain object-based language rather than a class-based one. JavaScript wasn't used for too much back in the day, since it wasn't as complex as it is now. Some of the more popular effects included a clock, scrolling text, maybe rainbow-colored text, or even a calendar and a calculator. This was the extent of JavaScript's use back in the day, and this would be considered the first official version of the language, officially released in 1997. The second one was released a year later and included some editorial changes, nothing major or spectacular, but ES3 version, which came in 1999, did include some substantial changes, such as adding regular expressions and try-catch statements, and also do-while loops and switch statements. Now, the next version would be released a decade later, in 2009, and it would be known as ECMA 5. The fourth version was skipped, and the long wait between the versions might be connected to the reason why. ES5 included developer-friendlier ways of working with strings and arrays. And ECMA 6 would be released 6 years later in 2015, and it basically marks the beginning of modern JavaScript. Instead of having to use var, the let variable was added, as well as the const keyword for read-only constants. We also have template literals now, arrow functions, and default parameter values to boot, which is something JavaScript did not come with prior to 2015. Now, since then, a lot of other cool features have been added to JavaScript, such as array flattening methods and knowledge coalescing operators, but no one knows what future has in store for JavaScript.